As we've said many, many times on this show, President Trump became a real Republican at the very worst time when conservative ideology could not be wanted by less Americans. Huffington Post reporter Dan Marans actually notes some of this in his new piece. Trump is paying the price for the lack of domestic progress in regions that helped deliver the presidency to him in 2016.
Empty promises around healthcare, infrastructure, and trade ensued after Trump followed suit on conventional Republican economic policies. Political reporter at the Huffington Post, Dan Marans, joins us now to elaborate on how Trump's trickle-down system is hurting his re-election efforts and really what went wrong from the 2016 campaign to the reality of Trump in the presidency. Great to see you, Dan.
Good to see you, Dan.
Great to be here.
So it was controversial, actually, even to report out this piece because, I mean, truly, and you got a lot of pushback for this idea that Trump actually did say some sort of economically left or populist things on the campaign trail, and he ended up not following through with them in office. Just take us through the thesis of the piece and what you kind of uncovered here.
Yeah, well, I think this was something I was intrigued by when Trump was a candidate, when a lot of us sort of took perverse pleasure in seeing him sort of destroy some of the sacred cows of the Republican Party, in seeing him mock the corrupt campaign finance system, promise to defend Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in a way that actually put Democrats to some degree on the defensive because Barack Obama himself had pursued cuts to some of those benefits. And of course on trade, where organized labor for decades had been pleading with the Democratic Party, with Democratic presidents to protect manufacturing and to try to revive it. And of course, he was promising to do that. And then there were more conventional liberal domestic policy priorities that he seemed very open to. And he would say things like, I'm not that Republican on this issue. He said that about universal health care. He said that about prescription drugs. And he said it about infrastructure when he laid out an infrastructure plan that had twice the dollar figure of Hillary Clinton's in 2016. So I was always fascinated by that. And I sort of knew because, frankly, I thought that Trump was not a very deep guy, that I thought it was very unlikely that he would stick to this stuff. And, I was sort of fascinated by the way Bernie Sanders latched onto this and immediately tried to create a frame of saying, I'm going to hold you to this, Mr. President. And I guess kind of knowing that Trump or really predicting that Trump would not hold to it, Bernie really sort of created this frame as, I can be a genuine populist for some of the constituencies that Trump brought in. And, I just thought it was worth kind of going through exactly what he promised and how that's turned out.
Yeah, I know. I think it's a great piece. And one thing I'm intrigued by, Dan, maybe talk about some of the pushback that you got. Because, I mean, it's just so obvious. You're here on Rising. We know what we think. But why can people not accept this? I mean, I think somebody called you like unsentient or something like that. Like, where does this come from? What is the objection?
So, by the way, the guy who called me, the only person, it was Tom Watson. And Tom Watson, for those who don't know, ran the press for Eliot Engel's reelection campaign.
Okay.
Enough said there. He's got maybe his own sentience issues to confront. But, the basic idea is that if you don't immediately say that Trump not only ran on racism, xenophobia, nativism, whatever, but the only reason he won, the only reason he had appeal were for those elements of his platform, then you are effectively denying or undermining the severity of his platform and his presidency. And that's not what I'm trying to do at all, obviously. And I think most people understand that there can be a candidate, a person, a political platform can be multifaceted. And there were at least a certain number of people who voted for Trump or who stayed home or whatever, who may have accepted his racial dog whistles or may have voted for him despite that racial demagoguery rather than because of it. And we know that because there were I think it's 6 million people who voted for Obama and then Trump. I may not be getting the figure correct. Those are obviously significant votes in the key battleground states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And, he really did it in part by muddying the waters on this. We also know, I really hang a lot of this on a poll on polling that 538 showed that he was basically, voters did not know what to make of him. And to the extent that they did, following the election, they essentially put him as only more conservative than recent Democratic presidents.
Right.
They did not put him, in sort of the same league. They really saw him as more moderate because, I didn't even get into this part of it, but he also ran against the Iraq War and against foreign interventionism. So there are these, he really did play that card rhetorically. And I think, the one place you could say that he has at least stuck to it philosophically is on trade. And that's been, he's sort of at least not done the proactive things that would typically further endanger manufacturing jobs. And he, as promised, did renegotiate NAFTA and trading relations with China. I sort of argue and I point to a lot of evidence that hasn't really been enough to revive the manufacturing sector in the way that he promised.
Yeah, there was an alternate universe in which he was, because what he did in 2016 is basically scrambled the political signals, right? Because he had some of this rhetoric that was kind of left and that slaughtered some of the sacred cows of the right, and then he had other things that were even more conservative or further to the right on certain issues. So he was very heterodox in that campaign, and now he's very sort of doctrinaire, down the line, standard issue Republican rhetoric, even in the way he goes after Joe Biden, saying he's a radical socialist. Like, you could hear that rhetoric out of any number of Republican campaigns for years and years and years. So what is your analysis of what happened here? I think the most obvious thing is most of these positions, and trade is probably the exception, were not that deeply held. They seemed like a good way to get elected. He said what he needed to say, and then when it came down to it, you basically had the same old standard Republican hands in staffing the administration. But what do you make of that piece of what happened between then and now?
Yeah, well, every anecdote that has come out of this White House has shown the president to be somebody who is petty, trivial, somebody who interrupts important meetings about the coronavirus to discuss whether Hope Hicks is going to call Tucker Carlson to tell him he wasn't nice to him on the previous night's broadcast. This is a guy who played footsie with the idea of single-payer health care in a 2000 book, but also, entertained the idea of that Mitt Romney lost because he was too tough on immigration, and then ran a campaign that was, more hardline on immigration than any Republican in recent memory. So he's someone who I think is self-interested, easily distracted. There is some debate as to whether, and exactly how much this was really all his fault and under his control. I spoke to Michael Lind for this piece, and of course I spoke to Sagar as well, who gave me some killer quotes. But Michael Lind he's kind of a liberal nationalist in the old mold. He's an immigration restrictionist, but he supports a large welfare state and everything like that, and a strong labor movement. And he sort of said to me, if you come in, you can't staff all 4,000 positions in the executive branch. You need to rely on the existing party infrastructure to do that. And so he was sort of more sympathetic to the idea of Trump outsourcing this to the Paul Ryans and the Mitch McConnell types, who are more standard issue, trickle down politicians. But, what we have seen is that when it's a personal vendetta, when it's somebody who insulted Trump or betrayed him, like Jeff Sessions, like Mark Sanford in Congress, there are a number of other folks, Trump will go to no end, will stop at nothing to end their political career. And so you really could imagine a scenario where, for example, he could say to Mitch McConnell, if you don't put an infrastructure bill on my desk, if you don't put a prescription drug bill on my desk, I'm just not going to give you any judges to confirm. We know that McConnell cares about that. And so there's a lot of leverage that he had to use. And I think just fundamentally, this is not somebody who's terribly serious about policy. We see him, even in these debates, he seems really online. We make these criticisms of the left. But it's a little true of Trump as well. He seemed genuinely surprised that he didn't get the back and forth with Joe Biden, for example. He was trying to nail Joe Biden for being for Medicare for all. I just didn't think that stood up to scrutiny. To the extent that that's a political liability or not, we could debate that. But it was one got the impression that he's really been consuming a lot. He's been living in kind of an echo chamber where people are focusing on these very arcane issues, right? There's Obamagate, there's, the FBI investigations. these are not the bread and butter issues that really win or lose elections.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Listen, if Trump ends up losing, what's in this piece will be a lot of the reason why, which really predates even coronavirus, but kind of predicts the response that he now has had to this crisis as well. Dan Marans, great to have you as always.
Thank you, Dan.
Great to be here, guys.
Yep.
Coming up on Rising, we're going to discuss why ACB may have some conflicts of interest surrounding her views on climate change when Rising returns.